Hey guys, how y'all doing today? I'm outside right now. I wanted to do a video. About 5 years ago, I created a Facebook group called Basic Income Toronto, and recently it's started to pick up steam all on its own accord, and I think that's because of what's been going on in the world. So I wanted to record this video specifically for that group. I'm gonna go through three things pretty clearly. Thing number one, what is neoliberalism and why is it collapsing? Thing number two, what is an economy? How does it actually work? And then thing number three, the basic income and why it's so important. Because I think it's important to go through very quickly what it is we've gone through as a people, and speak about it honestly, and speak about the solutions that we have going forward. So what is neoliberalism? Neoliberalism is a religious ideology that is framed to sound like an economic policy that was put forward by corporate America and corporate European and corporate Canada. Their acolytes were people like Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Brian Mulroney, and they all worked to create a system that appeared like an economic system, but in truth was actually just a religious ideology. Neoliberalism has been called trickle-down economics, is sort of the common way to understand it. The idea behind it is very simply, let's just give all the money to a small group of billionaires, and then they will in turn invest that money back into the society. This is a complete fraud. It's obviously a lie. There's a reason why George Bush Sr. called it voodoo economics, because he acknowledged that it was a religious ideology. It wasn't an economic system. It just sounds like an economic system. And it collapses for very obvious reasons, right? Like, if the purpose of investing is to get money, then why would anyone invest if they already have all the money? So instead of investing in the societies, they just jam their money into offshore accounts, which calcifies an economy and causes it to stop functioning. Because economies, and one of the real side effects of this neoliberal period is that there is a pretty intense economic illiteracy amongst the populace, right? They've come to believe that this religious ideology is how an economy functions. Which is completely false. It doesn't actually work. So what does an economy actually look like? Economies work in cycles. They operate cyclically. So I spend money, which is your earning, and then you spend that money, which is someone else's earning, and then they spend money, which is somebody else's earning, right? And money circulates throughout an economy, and the government receives all of that money back through taxation, and then they redistribute the money back out, right? And typically, historically, how the government has historically here in North America, how the government has redistributed that money is through programs. So, like, think our universal healthcare system here in Canada, right? That is a way that the government redistributes money, is through that system, to encourage people to join a system that has an ancillary benefit of creating healthcare for the society. We as individuals don't pay for that healthcare. The government itself is responsible for negotiating the price of that particular item, and the system works. It obviously works. You can just look down to the States to take a look at a system that doesn't have a universal healthcare system, and you can tell me what you would prefer to have during this period of time. So the cyclical nature of the economy means that once we decide as a society to fund an endeavor or fund a project, then the cyclical nature of the economy ensures that it remains funded, right? So take a look at, like, the childcare benefit. The childcare benefit is a basic income for children, right? Nobody's running around saying, how are we going to fund the childcare benefit? Right? Nobody's running around saying that, because it's already funded. It's already been funded. The money is given to the families who have these children. They in turn spend that money, and that money gets respent and recirculated through the economy until finally, through taxation, it's drawn back to the government for redistribution. Now, because of the neoliberal period, we've created this false narrative that if we cut taxes on the wealthy and if we cut taxes on the corporations, that this will somehow lead to more economic benefit. But this is how you collapse an economy, right? Because economies function through spending. Money has to be spent to cycle through the economy, and if it isn't spent, then it doesn't cycle. And what multimillionaires and billionaires do with their money is they just send it overseas, right? They send it offshore to be offshored in some Panama account or some Swiss bank account or something like that, where it's taken out of the economy, cannot be taxed any longer, has no and doesn't contribute to local economies, certainly, but to any economy, really. And ultimately, these neoliberals, they're just using this as a way to judge who is winning the game of capitalism, right? They're not helping anyone. They're not building new institutions. They're not building any systems. They're not participating in any kind of social structure. They're just collapsing the economy. The COVID-19 crisis has really revealed this completely, because these collapses that we're experiencing now because of neoliberal economics were inevitable. They're built in, they're systemic. The COVID-19 crisis is just accelerating these collapses. They're making it so that instead of taking another 10, 20 years to occur, they're happening all at once and right now. And so it's becoming completely impossible to ignore or deny that neoliberalism is just a religious ideology that's couched to sound like an economy, especially once you understand the cyclical nature of how an economy functions. That if I spend money and then you spend money and then someone else spends money and it all goes back to the government and then they redistribute it, and then I spend money and then you spend money and then the other guy spends money and then it all goes back to the government and we redistribute it, right? We have a stable, closed economy that works. This is why as neoliberal capitalism begins to collapse, this is why deficits are not very scary, right? If you're a neoliberal capitalist who believes in a religious ideology, deficits are horrible because you see a deficit as something that you, as the neoliberal, have to pay back. Whereas a deficit is really just an increase in government spending, right? And that if you're focused on how to pay that back, well, when I spend money and you spend money and the other guy spends money and we all earn it and all of that, it creates economic activity. You're growing your economy. And through taxation, you inevitably do pay that money back. So all a deficit really ends up being is it's just a way for us to look at and be like, okay, that's how much the government is actually spending. And because the private sector isn't spending that money, the public sector has to, or else you don't actually have any economy whatsoever. And you can look down to the states to see what it looks like if you don't actually do this, right? If you don't actually provide the citizenry with the resources they need, then you end up with breadlines and you end up with mass revolts, which is what's happening. You can't just print money, give it to corporations, and think that they're going to ameliorate anything, because corporations don't actually care about you. One of the big things that I think we have to be more open about, and we have to speak about more openly, is that the process by which we have been getting food and shelter in this society is completely untenable, right? Food and shelter is withheld from you unless you sell yourself to a market that's completely dominated by billionaires, right? The wind just picked up, so I'm worried that it might have obliterated all that. So I'll say it again. Food and shelter is withheld from you unless you sell yourself to a market that's completely dominated by billionaires. there's a term for this. It's called wage slavery, right? This system is made even more egregious once you begin to realize that the people that you work for also own the places that you rent from and the places that you buy goods from. So you work for these people so that you can give the wages they give you back to them. And this cycle, of course, gets worse and worse because the neoliberal wants to suppress your wages and wants to raise your rent and wants to raise the price of your goods so that they can put more numbers in their offshore accounts and win the game of capitalism more. This, of course, leads to an inevitable collapse because eventually there comes a point where the wage earner, the level of his wages, can no longer purchase the goods that are being sold. So this leads to an ultimate collapse of the system, which we're experiencing right now. So in the midst of this, the basic income, and why the basic income is so important. Because we could continue with the failed neoliberal experiment, right? We could continue believing in this religious ideology that doesn't work and isn't an economic system, because the thing is structured to extract wealth, right? Neoliberalism as an ideology extracts wealth from economies. It doesn't perpetuate economies. It doesn't believe in an actual cyclical nature of an economy. They extract wealth and put it in offshore accounts. So they don't care about the cyclical nature of an economy. They're not interested in that. They're interested in extracting wealth from economies, right? They're interested in extracting wealth from you, the wage slave. And so we can ameliorate this with a basic income. A basic income being a good start for how to actually begin structuring a more civil society. And I do say a start because there are lots of other things that need to be done in order to make this society more fair and equitable and stable for everyone. And the basic income, very simply stated, and I think you all know this, is just a small stipend to pay for food and shelter, right? Instead of food and shelter being withheld by neoliberal corporatists, food and shelter is provided by the government through a basic income, allowing people to fairly interact with the food and shelter market, and any market they truly care to, in order to rebuild the society, to recover from this neoliberal religious ideology that we have been inflicted with for the last 40 years. And I think it's desperately important that we do this. It's desperately important because we need to reverse the neoliberal period. We need to reverse this period of extraction. We need to look at these people who have been engaged in this completely phony endeavor and say to them, hey, you can't just extract wealth from the society and then walk away from the wreckage. And to do that, we need to redistribute wealth back into the society and redistribute it in a way that is universal, that puts no judgment whatsoever on the needs of the people, and stops the moralizing of poverty, right? Because that's how neoliberals operate. That they take a look at poverty, and instead of using economic language to acknowledge the existence of it, they use moral language because it's a religious ideology, not an economic system. And so we need a basic income so that people can secure food and shelter for themselves and to restabilize the society, to then rebuild any kind of private sector system that might possibly exist after this period. You can take a look at a society that decides not to do this, right? You can just take a look at the United States. You can see the mass protests. You can see the explosion of anger that's happening. You can see the desperation. You can see the poverty. And if we don't move quickly on a basic income, on a permanent, universal basic income, we can very easily go in that direction, right? We can impoverish our society. We can become a poor society very quickly. Because this is the reality of the United States, is that they have become so poor because all of the wealth exists in a very small handful of people. They've become so poor that they might not even be able to recover from it. That their ideology of individualism, right, instead of focusing on structures and systems, right, their religious ideology of individualism is so entrenched that they don't even have educators or experts on how systems function. So they don't even have the tools necessary to actually build any systems to help people. Here in Canada, it is different. We do have those things. Even though we have been inflicted with this neoliberal period, especially on the side of the Conservatives, but the Liberals are just as guilty, if you ask me. But because we do have people who have been focused on how systems work, how economies actually function, when the pandemic began, we passed something called the Serb. Now, so the Serb has prevented breadlines. It has alleviated a lot of suffering from the society. It's created a more civil arrangement. It's allowed people who have been inflicted in the wage slave system to be able to step away from that system for a moment and redress it. When conservatives especially say, oh, well, we can't get people back to work in the middle of a pandemic because of the Serb, what they're really saying is we want to continue paying wage slave labor to risk people's lives in order to sell toys or to, get Karen a haircut. It's this really despicable sort of position, but that's how neoliberalism functions. They don't value human life. They value profits that they can extract and put in an offshore account somewhere to collapse your economy. And the Serb is a temporary passage, right? It is a temporary thing. This is where things get really spotty and really dangerous, because the liberals can very easily sell the society back to this neoliberal religious death cult. They can sell the society right back to them come October, right? If the Serb just goes away and it ceases to be, right, it's going to force the workers to continue selling themselves into a billionaire-dominated market, and they won't be able to actually participate in the rebuilding of an actual economy, right? Because the wealth that the wage slaves generate will simply just be extracted and sent into offshore accounts, and the economy will continue to collapse. And so it is our job as citizens now to put pressure on the liberals to make them aware that we understand what the game is. We understand that neoliberalism is a failure. We understand that it propels itself through wage slavery and this process of wealth extraction. We understand all that. And we want to rebuild a new economy. We want to rebuild an economy that excludes these neoliberals, that says to them, we no longer take what you say seriously. Because what you say is strictly a religious ideology that, when you actually look at it, is structured to be a death cult, sacrificing the lives of citizens in order to offshore money for the benefit of no one, not even the neoliberal. And so now we need to be looking at building new institutions. Now we need to be looking at how to structure a society better. And if you take a look at like the childcare benefit, which is a basic income for children, it increases economic activity, which of course makes sense because it funnels money into an economy. I spend money, I give money to you so that you give money to someone else so that they give money to someone else, and all the way along it's taxed by the government, which then turns around and redistributes it back into the society. That's a stable economy. And so we need to let these liberals know that we're onto the game, and we need to let them know that what we want is a basic income as a start. I think that there are many other things that can be done, and you should like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you want to know more about that. Well, and with that, good luck out there, guys. I hope you're having fun.